Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, an hour-long fireside chat with Doug Casey of Casey Research, the author of the new book, Right on the Money, comments on what he believes is a massive Canadian real estate bubble and the vulnerable financial positions of banks in the U.S., Europe, and even China. He also has some year-end investment advice. We'll talk to Doug Casey right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Doug Casey of Casey Research. And Doug, the things that you research and dig into, always fascinating. And you have a brand new book.
I do, Jim. It's called Right on the Money, and it's actually a financial book. And I'm fairly pleased with the timing because I think that 2014 is going to be the year when we exit the eye of the hurricane that we're currently in and we've been in. Well, let me start by saying that the financial hurricane started in 2007 with the near collapse of the economy in 2008 and 2009. For the last few years, we've been in the eye of the hurricane, the eye of the storm, but I think we're going to come out the trailing edge in 2014, and it's going to be much, much more serious and much longer lasting than what we encountered in 2009 and 2010, which were tough years, you'll recall.
So what's going to happen?
So it's because of that this book is out now, because I think it's still possible. In fact, this is excellent timing for people to get their houses in order and perhaps even profit mightily from the coming storm.
And so how would one profit?
Well, it's very hard to be an investor in today's world. I define an investor as somebody who allocates capital to produce more wealth. In today's world, you're almost forced to be a speculator, which I define as somebody who allocates capital to take advantage of politically caused distortions in the marketplace. So, with the governments of the world printing up trillions of new currency units every year, desperately trying to maintain the status quo, this is causing huge distortions in the economy. It's going to create more bubbles.
When you said people are being forced to be speculators, that doesn't sound like a good term if you're trying to plan your financial future.
Well, it's unfortunate because in the ideal world, if we lived in a true capitalistic society, people could devote their attention to producing and creating new wealth and satisfying market needs. But in the kind of chaotic economy that's been created by government intervention of all types, it's increasingly important, unfortunate but important, to spend more time moving around assets, trying to stay ahead of inflation. So it's a real pity. Being a speculator is a very profitable thing to do and a necessary thing to do, but in a free market society, which we don't have, speculators would be largely out of business because there would be no government-caused, no politically caused distortions for them to capitalize on. So it's a bit perverse, but that's the world we live in.
I know, and so many people are relying on financial advisors who quite often tend to be cheerleaders for stocks that are overpriced, overvalued, and I'm looking at the tech stocks like Facebook or Twitter, where billions have been invested, but these companies have not made a penny yet.
Well, and I don't know if they ever will, quite frankly. When it comes to buying stocks, and I'm not enthusiastic about buying stocks right now, incidentally. I mean, I can think of reasons the stock market could go higher, the main reason being that as the world's governments print up even more purchasing media, that's going to have to go someplace. A lot of it's going to go into real assets. But I like to buy stocks when they're cheap. And people forget that at major bottoms in the marketplace, the average stock, the Dow Jones, for instance, things of that nature is yielding 8 to 12% in dividends. Now, dividends are trivial, and price-earnings ratios are very high. If you want to get into the stock market at this point, I'm afraid you're doing little more than gambling. I don't like the idea right now. I'll wait until there's a cyclical collapse, and there will be, and that's the time to buy stocks.
Are the banks going to be able to survive another plunge in the markets?
Well, I don't think so. That's not a prediction, but most of the banks in the world are actually, in fact, bankrupt. They have more liabilities than they have assets. Most of the banks in the world today are being run as hedge funds, in effect. A sound bank, a bit of economic theory, but I think your listeners might find this interesting because few people bring this up. A sound bank has two types of deposits, checking accounts and savings accounts. And there's a very strict wall, a great distinction between those two kinds of accounts. It's been totally obviated now. Now there's no distinction between them at all. The difference is this. With a checking account, historically, you paid the bank money to store your money safely and give you the right to write checks against it. So they were providing a service for you. With a savings account, you lent the bank money, maybe at 3%, and they'd lend it out at 6%, generally for no more than a year, and always against heavy security. It was a totally different business. So that's with the fractional reserve system that all the banks of the world use today. They're on a very slippery slope. It's why in the U.S. Back in 2008, they came up with TARP, where $750 billion was created out of nowhere to bail out these big banks that had done all kinds of stupid things with their depositors' money. And they're in worse shape now than they were then. And they're bigger now than they were then. The problem is much more serious now than it was when this crisis started in 2007.
What about Canada's banks? They managed to get through that crisis, I think, because they've always been stingy lenders.
Well, the Canadian banks are perhaps better than the American banks, but I've got to say this about Canada. Most of Canada is in a real estate bubble right now, and it's been in a real estate bubble for a couple of years. Canadian real estate, I would put my finger in particular on Vancouver real estate, is perhaps the most overpriced in the world. So if I had a piece of property in a metropolitan area in Canada, I would find a bid for it tomorrow morning because just as American real estate, it floats on a sea of debt, and interest rates are going up all over the world. Very bad time to be owning something that's as overpriced as Canadian real estate.
And yet all the surveys being done here by the real estate companies show people still desperately want to buy, and they don't seem to care about the price. Is that a dangerous attitude?
You're absolutely right, and I'd draw everybody's attention back to the way the American real estate market was in 2006 and 2007, where the same thing was true, and where all over the world, the stock market in 1999, during the middle of the internet bubble in 2000 was, people couldn't buy enough of those stocks, these high-tech stocks, at any price. And you know what happened. Most of them went bankrupt. A lot of them lost 95% of their value. So it's a floating crap game in the market. And there'll be many more bubbles that are going to be created in the future by all this funny money being created by the central banks. I don't know what the next one is. Quite possibly the next bubble may be in gold. So I think gold is an excellent place to be now, both for potential gains, speculative gains, but regardless of that, because it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And that's very important in a world that has a quadrillion dollars of derivatives. That's 1,000 trillion, or 1,000,000 billion, if you wish, dollars worth of derivatives, which is a daisy chain of IOUs.
What about China? Are they in danger of having a collapse? They have all those empty cities that they've built.
Well, the Chinese have done extremely years since they've opened up their economy. So kudos to them, and their success is deserved. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the rulers in China have made all the mistakes that the rulers of the Western world have made too. Printed up lots of money, misallocated huge amounts of capital. The banks in China are on the razor edge of destruction. They'll never get all the money they've lent out paid back to them. Depositors in those banks could walk away with nothing, just as those in North America and Europe could. This is a very serious worldwide situation. It's not a problem in the U.S. or Canada alone. This is true in China. This is true in Japan. This is true in Europe. Very serious. The consequences of this aren't just financial and economic. They're going to be social and political and military. So hang on to your hat.
We'll have more with Doug Casey next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the Internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
We're speaking with Doug Casey of Casey Research. Doug, you were saying we're probably looking at social, political, military unrest or developments. And I'm just looking back at China now, expanding their air defense zone. People are respecting it. It seems there's a lot of pushing and shoving kind of under the scenes that perhaps we're not aware of between China, the U.S., and Russia.
Yes, I think there is. I talk about that quite a bit in the book, actually. But I've got to put my finger on the U.S. as being the provocateur here. The United States having aircraft carriers and bombers a few hundred miles off the coast of China is as provocative as if the Chinese were to have aircraft carriers and bombers floating around in the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of San Francisco. It's exactly the same thing, and turnabout is fair play. So when you push somebody around in their own backyard, you're looking for trouble. And I'm afraid the United States is eventually going to get it. It's well known that we've got significant troops in over 100 countries around the world, and they're not there just to pass out nylons and chocolates to the locals.
They're there for some big reason. They always say it's for defense.
They're sticking their nose into other people's business, and other people don't like it. In addition to that fact, they're an active force to bankrupt the U.S., the society in the U.S. The so-called defense industry, and I don't like to call it that because they're not defending against anything. They're actually the biggest danger to people that live on this continent, cost us about $1 trillion per year. That's money that could be spent productively, creating new wealth. Instead, it's spent on B-2 bombers and aircraft carriers that only dissipate wealth, in addition to possibly lighting a match on the next powder keg that'll blow up in the next war. So it's funny. The military is perceived as about the only part of the U.S. government that works, but it's the most dangerous part of the U.S. government. Not to say that things like the NSA and FBI and DEA and all these other Praetorian agencies aren't equally dangerous, but the military is an extreme danger.
I know the excuse for aircraft carriers is, well, we have to ensure that our shipping lanes for the acquisition of oil are open and are safe, but yet the U.S. plans to be energy self-sufficient in a couple of years. So where is the excuse for aircraft carriers then?
Well, that's a very good point. The U.S. is likely to become self-sufficient in oil again because of fracking and horizontal drilling into shale deposits, which have scores or hundreds of billions of barrels of oil right here in North America. That's assuming that they're allowed to drill these things, because there are lots of NGOs and local governments that are trying to perform a shakedown on the oil companies. But in any event, I would say that if an oil company wants to ship oil from Nigeria to the U.S. or from Mexico to the U.S. or from, for that matter, Iraq to the U.S., it's up to them to defend their ship and make sure it gets here. It's not up to the U.S. taxpayer, and it's certainly not up to the U.S. taxpayer to defend shipping lanes taking oil from the Middle East to China and Japan, which is what they say they're doing.
Why has the U.S. Been the only nation since the Korean War that feels it has the right to bomb other countries if that country doesn't agree with U.S. policy?
I know, it really is funny. It's American exceptionalism. The U.S. knows best, and it's completely insane. I mean, the Germans felt that way in the 1930s, and the U.S. could wind up creating the same kind of mess for the same reason. Other people just don't like heavily armed foreigners sticking their noses and their guns in their own business. It's going to end badly, entirely apart from helping bankrupt the U.S.
I know the excuse was, stop Hitler and his totalitarian government that'll spy on everybody. Well, we both have governments in Canada and the U.S. now that are spying on everybody.
Yeah, it's very disturbing at this point. And I've got to say, I'm talking to you right now from Argentina. I spend a lot of the time, most of the year actually, down here in Argentina and Uruguay. And these governments are not oriented that way so much. They've got their own problems. But in these countries, politicians are mainly in office just to steal money, which is to be expected. But in the U.S., it's to become very wealthy, stealing money, but also to be social engineers and try to reform society in whatever way they, in their own aberrated minds, they think is best. So that's why I prefer being down here. And I'm kind of out of harm's way down here. Nobody bothers spying on Argentina or Uruguayan residents, unless it's the U.S., of course.
And I think Argentina learned their lesson the hard way when they had their internal problems and thousands of people were disappeared by the government or tortured, imprisoned. I don't think they want to see round two of that.
No, they don't. This is one of the good things about Argentina. People hear a lot of bad things about it, and there are a lot of bad things about the government. Cristina Fernandez Kirchner is probably criminally insane, and all of the people around her are sociopaths. Well, that's par for the course in these South American governments. I mean, all of them are run by socialists and fascists. That's the bad news. But the good news is that because of what happened in Argentina in the late 70s and the early 80s, and it also happened in Uruguay, just across the Plate River, to a lesser extent. They pretty much hate the police and they hate the military. And that's healthy in a society. So, good news, bad news kind of thing. I like the place because on a personal basis, it's very free. They leave you alone. The cost of living is very low. And the standard of living is extremely high. Certainly if you're a foreigner that's buying things with U.S. or Canadian dollars.
Wow. So how come they've been successful when our big industrial powers, Canada, the U.S., and others, are looking at perhaps another collapse of the markets and hard times once again?
Well, it's hard times for the average Argentine citizen because of the idiotic things that its government's doing. It's kind of like the U.S. government is taking lessons from the Argentine government and destroying the currency and regulating the economy and so forth. But as a foreigner living down here, these things really don't bother you at all. Rather, you're in a position to take advantage of the culture, which is a totally different thing, and is most enjoyable. And when you're a tourist, a permanent tourist, if you would, in one of these countries, the government doesn't treat you as a milk cow, the way the Canadian or the U.S. governments treat their citizens living within that country. They treat you as an honored and valued guest to be cultivated. So it's a very different experience. They're very happy that I hire a maid who does everything for me and pay her $600 a month, because otherwise she'd be unemployed. So it's a win-win from my point of view, the maid's point of view, and from that matter, even the government's point of view down here.
We'll have more with Doug Casey from Casey Research right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
We're back with Doug Casey from Casey Research, taking a look at what's happening with Canada's banks and everything. We've always focused on the economy and the relationship between Canada and the U.S. I mean, no two economies are closer intertwined than those two. And the saying in Canada always is, it's like a mouse sleeping with an elephant. Every time it rolls over, you better scramble and look out for yourself. Is there any way Canadians could perhaps protect themselves from American politics and economic policies?
Well, sad to say, Canada's catching the American disease. I mean, for years, when you enter Canada, the customs and immigration people wear bulletproof vests and sidearms. This is something that never used to be the case that I recall. And they interrogate people like potential terrorists. This is another bad habit they've picked up from their compatriots in the South. And in a lot of ways, Canada is, a lot of bad ways, Canada is becoming more like the U.S., with the financial controls and the government sticking its nose into people's bank accounts and so forth. So if I was a Canadian, I would definitely get a significant amount of my money out of Canada, especially now that Canadian real estate is high and the Canadian dollar is high. This is an excellent time to diversify and make sure that not all of your wealth is under the control of any one government.
Spread it around and, of course, like you said, diversify. Any danger that we'll see more bank bail-ins in the U.S. and here in Canada. Canada was lucky. Once again, we didn't have bail-ins into the banks, but we did bail out the auto industry. And just like the U.S., when the Canadian government sold its shares, it was billions and billions of dollars short of what they put in.
Well, the Canadian dollar is on the same road that the U.S. dollar is on. It's going to reach its intrinsic value at some point in the not-so-distant future. And I'm afraid its intrinsic value is quite low. I think a lot of Canadians are unaware of the fact that even though Canada is a major gold producer, the Central Bank of Canada owns almost no gold. They sold it all about a decade ago, more or less at the bottom, about the same time the British Bank of England sold almost all of its gold, almost flat at the bottom of the market. So what should a Canadian do? Well, I lived in Canada for years, and I enjoyed it. I suggest that everybody have a significant base in actual gold coins. Buy a whole bunch of Maple Leafs and buy more every month. Now is a very good time. Gold is very reasonably priced again. It's starting to impress me as once again being a high potential speculation as much as a sound asset. Buy silver Maple Leafs. And I'll say this too, that Canada is the epicenter for mining finance in the world. And these gold stocks, the gold exploration stocks and the miners, are basically as cheap now as they've ever been in history. And it seems to me that there's potential at this moment by buying now for 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 50 to 1 gains. This is not atypical in this market, and I've been watching this market for 40 years. That's a long time. So I think we could be on the cusp of another gigantic bull run in the mining stocks. Mining's a crappy industry, very problematical in a lot of ways, but I think it's a fantastic place to allocate some speculative funds at this time, in addition to physical gold and silver.
Near Whitehorse in the Yukon, they've discovered the world's biggest diamond field. The federal government has just given approval to the consortium that's going to mine that. And in 2 years, they expect to be pulling $50 million worth of diamonds out of the ground every month for decades. Yes. Is that the kind of opportunity we should be looking for?
Those opportunities are out there. I'm personally not a big fan of diamonds. As I'm sure many of your listeners know, there are two separate and distinct processes that have been around for a decade now that make perfect diamonds, indistinguishable from the real thing. They actually are diamonds. In fact, only distinguishable from the real thing because they're too perfect. And I think that a difference that makes no difference is no difference. So I'm not a big fan of diamonds as an investment. I'm not going to speak to a diamond mine because it's catering to the market and they can sell them for what they can, the economics being what they are. But yeah, there are there are 92 naturally occurring elements in the periodic table, and it's becoming harder and harder to find large and rich deposits of most of them at this point. The low-hanging fruit has been found in much of the world. At the same time, if you want to live in an industrial society, if you want to live in a advanced society, you're going to need more metals. You're going to need more nickel, more copper, more cobalt, more tantalum every year. And they're becoming harder to find and more expensive to mine. So it's something that I think people should pay attention to. And Canada is the world's epicenter of mining finance. So something that I think your listeners should be looking at.
And I saw a headline in one of the financial papers recently that said mining stocks are perhaps the bargain of the century right now.
I'd have to agree with that. They're as good a bargain now, better a bargain perhaps, than they were at the last bottom in 2001. There have been, in the last 40 years, 5 or 6 significant bottoms. And from each of those bottoms, the market as a whole has gone up 1,000%, with some stocks doing much, much better than that. This is one of those times. The key is to select the stocks carefully. They're not all the same.
And if you're taking a look at a mining stock, then how do you know if you're getting a good one or a bad one?
Well, that's what we do for a living at KC Research, and I urge your listeners to go to our website, kcresearch.com. I hate to put commercials like that into interviews like this, but
Doug, you're worth it.
I can't resist the temptation. We've got 3 or 4 free newsletters, and they're actually quite good. And we publish free special reports from time to time. And then, of course, we've got about a dozen paid publications in all areas of the market, mining and commodities, technology, the stock market as a whole, yield securities. So people could take a look at those too. But we're not the only people in the business that I think are good and know what they're doing. So getting independent advice, and once again, I hate to blow the horn of this sector of the business that I'm in, but I think it's important. It's fine getting advice from brokers. There's a lot of knowledge available from brokers, but brokers are in the business of selling stocks, and you've got to keep that in the back of your mind when you're talking to them.
We'll take a look at high tech investment. You said there's 3 ways that's going to go in the new year. The best case scenario, of course, your Googles and Twitters will continue to increase in value, but the other 2 scenarios not so cheerful.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about any areas of the market right now, with the exception of mining stocks, which has always been my specialty because they're very cheap right now. But things are overvalued the world over. There are some exceptions. I was in Cyprus a couple of months ago with one of our analysts, Nick Giambruno, who writes The International Man. That's another website that I think will interest people, internationalman.com. And we spent a week there researching Cyprus in general and the Cypriot stock market in particular, which incidentally is down 98% from its peak in 2007. Now, that's very unusual that a world stock market, even a small one like Cyprus, it only has about 110 stocks traded on it, of which about 20 trade reasonable volume. But when any world market is down 98%, you have to reflexively go and take a look at it. And it was worth it. We wrote a long report on it, quite detailed, going into the individual stocks and the overall situation. And some of these stocks are selling at 10% of book value, yielding 8%, selling for 3 or 4 times earnings. So there are bargains, but you have to look for where blood is in the streets. And unfortunately, most people don't want to buy when blood is in the streets. It's too scary. They'd rather buy when the news media is saying everything's coming up roses and all their neighbors are talking about how much they've made at cocktail parties. And that's when people like to jump in. It's perverse, but that's the way it is.
We'll have more with Doug Casey right after this on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Doug Casey. Doug, taking a look back at 2013, was this an extraordinary year financially, politically?
Well, I'm trying to think of something that'll make the year jump off the calendar for me. And no, nothing new, nothing different. The wars have continued, and there haven't been any real new ones. The markets have gone up. No, 2013 is just another year in the eye of the hurricane. But I think there's an excellent chance that 2014 is going to have a very different character. This isn't a prediction. Anything can happen. But I think the odds are high that we go back into the storm in this coming year, and it's going to be very unpleasant for a lot of people.
What about two personalities that came up this year? We have Edward Snowden, who has told us just about everybody on the planet is being spied on by the major governments. What kind of an impact has that had on the average person? Are we more fearful, or have we always suspected, Big Brother is listening?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Edward Snowden. I think he's a genuine hero. The same is true of Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, and actually of Bradley Manning, who's the young soldier that's going to spend the rest of his life in jail for having assisted Assange with WikiLeaks. I mean, these people have performed a gigantic service to society at large and to every individual in it, making them aware of the criminal activities of the U.S. government. And they're all hunted men. It's a sad testimony.
Yes, I know judges in both Canada and the U.S. have mentioned this unauthorized wiretapping and eavesdropping is unconstitutional in both Canada and the U.S., and the reaction from the governments has been absolute silence on it.
Now, the Constitution, certainly in the United States, is and has been for years a dead letter. They mouth the words, but the words mean absolutely nothing in reality. If you go over the most important part of the Constitution of the U.S. is the first 10 amendments to it, which became part of the Constitution at the same time as it was written. And the point of those 10 amendments is to spell out how what the government can't do, and to spell out the individual's rights. And every single one of them does this point. The people in the government can do exactly what they want. They've gotten completely out of control. And let me point out that you don't get the best and brightest that go to work for a government anywhere. They actually attract busybodies, people that like to control other people. You've got two kinds of people in the world. People that like to control physical reality, and those are the creators of the world that invent things and build things. And then you've got people that like to control other people, and they inevitably are drawn into government, which is organized coercion. And the problem is that that type of person is now coming out from under his rock. He's feeling his oats, and these governments of the world are almost in unison, are becoming increasingly pathological and increasingly dangerous. It's a very serious situation.
Doug, I can't remember who said it, but it was a famous person who had the quote, "The last refuge of the scoundrel is patriotism."
That's right. It's not the same person that said, I think my country is the best country in the world because that's where I was born. Frankly, I don't believe in these things. I think everybody, all 7 billion of us, should be considered citizens of the world. And nationalism is a sickness where just because through an accident of birth you were born in some particular geographic area, you have to treat people that were accidentally born in some other geographical area as potential enemies. It's actually completely insane. So patriotism is a greatly overrated virtue. In fact, it's not a virtue. And I'll go further. Let me say that democracy, which has become a secular god, a secular religion, is also greatly overrated. Democracy is nothing other than mob rule, restrained by a constitution when we're lucky, but these constitutions are turning into nothing but meaningless pieces of paper. in both the U.S. and Canada. So I'm not a fan of democracy either. I am a fan of liberty and individual freedom. That's what you want. I am a fan of the free market. But democracy is, as I said, nothing but mob rule. And of course, there are other secular religions that are rising up at this point. Greenism is one of them. I mean, save the bees, save the trees, save the whales, save those snails, as George Carlin said. And I'm all for the environment. I like it. But it's become a mania, too. So there are all kinds of bad memes that are floating around out in society today.
People seem to grab a cause. Right now, everything has to be gluten-free. Unfortunately, gluten is where most of the nutrition is in a grain, and unless you have celiac disease or a sensitivity to that particular protein, you're giving up the best part of the wheat. Yet everything now is bragging about being gluten-free.
Well, I don't have any strong opinions on that myself.
But it's just one platform that people seem to have jumped on without knowing why.
Look, it's like Gilda Radner said, if it's not one damn thing, it's something else. It's always something. Personally, I've had some good luck with the Paleolithic diet, eating like a caveman, because over several 100,000 years of evolution, that's what we've been genetically adjusted to. But to each his own.
Yes, I don't really want to.
I certainly don't approve of stunts like Bloomberg in New York has pulled, telling people that they can't drink this, they can't have sugar, can't have too much salt, and now they're even going to outlaw electronic cigarettes in New York. I mean, this is just a nanny state gotten completely out of control.
And I think, true democracy, I think, would not allow political parties elect the best person, not the best bunch of guys at organizing money.
Well, for many years, I've been an anarchist. And an anarchist is somebody that doesn't believe that the state has a right to exist. That's not to say, now, anarchism has gotten a bad reputation for itself through some bad actors, unfortunately. It has nothing to do with violence or anything like that. It simply means that individuals shouldn't be ruled by a state. That's all it believes. We believe in the market. We believe in order. We believe in individual dignity. We believe in freedom. All these good things which are conflated with democracy. But no, I don't believe in voting in elections because it just encourages them. And they're the wrong kind of people that run for elections. You get to choose between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So I think that people that vote are no more than what Lenin called useful idiots, supporting Party A or Party B. In the U.S., do you support the Republicrats or the Demopublicans? I mean, they're 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Doug, maybe perhaps one last thought. Speaking of Tweedledum, what about Toronto Mayor Rob Ford? Where does he fit into all this?
Well, from my point of view, not living in Toronto, he's free amusement. He's free entertainment. So, and I've got to say, I rather like his candor on some subjects. The fact that he's, kind of a drunken bum is unfortunate, but most politicians are like that at heart. So why people give others more respect than they give Rob is, to me, kind of silly.
I know a lot of people in Toronto have told me at least he's got spending under control at City Hall, which others failed to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, sure, he's a bit of a buffoon in his personal life, but everybody's got their bad habits and faults. So, no, that's not the important thing.
Doug, best of the new year and the holidays, and I suggest people, if you want to find out more, check out his brand new book.
Yes, Right on the Money. It's on Amazon, and I hope that people will be entertained and hopefully pick up lots of valuable tips, which it's rather replete with.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us, Doug.
My pleasure.
Thanks to our guest, Doug Casey of Casey Research, and thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard for Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.